Hey everybody, welcome to today's video. In today's video, we're going to be discussing battery changes for Ebel watches. Ebel is a Movado Group owned company. It was purchased by Movado in, I believe, 2004 and has significantly changed its styling since then. You'll notice that on the Ebel watches, almost all of their watches are top loading watches, which makes them watertight. Most of the time it's watertight. There are typically 5 screws that hold a bezel in place that keeps the watch assembled. And I'm going to show you how to take the watch apart, pop the movement out, and change the battery today in these two beautiful ladies' watches. So let's get started. And of course, if you're interested in things like this, jewelry designing, watch repair, watch reviews, please click on my channel, become a subscriber, and like this video. And I will continue to do more episodes like this. And Ebel has a specific design. You can see the 4 screws in the back. They pretty much just hold the bands in place so that you can take those out, clean them, whatever you want to do to them, change them. However, it's the front that we have to deal with because there are no openings on the back of the case. It is a solid case with a opening only on the top. So you'll notice that on the front of Ebel watches, there are typically 5 screws. These 5 screws are usually made of solid gold or stainless steel. So just remember where they are. The bezel is keyed typically to these screws. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws. On this particular model, they are solid gold. So we have to remove those. But the first thing we're going to do before we remove those screws is to pull out the crown. To pull out the crown, you can use your fingernails, as I'm going to do in this video, or you can use a plastic pry tool or a pair of plastic pry tools. What you want to do is pull that crown out completely straight out. You don't want to move it at an angle because you can damage the female side of that. And if we look at the crown here, you can see that it is a crown attached to a female end of a stem. And these types of stems are typical of Ebel watches, as with older vintage Longines or Omegas where the cases were completely sealed. Okay, once we pull that stem out, we can go in there, and I like to push in the stem that's in the watch movement itself in just in case. It doesn't have to be done most of the time, but just in case, if the stem gets stuck in the case tube, it can be difficult to get out. Next thing we're going to do is put on some gloves and start removing those 5 golden screws, and we're going to be very careful with these as not to damage them or strip them. So I'm using my screwdriver here just to start unscrewing the first screw, and I'm going to take that out and put it aside in a safe place. You don't want to lose those. These are very expensive to replace if you do lose those. Let's not bore you with the removal of the 5 screws, but we're going to get through that, put them all aside, and we'll move on to the next step, which is to examine the bezel and see if there's any dirt or debris in it. If there's not, then we can gently lift out the bezel from the watch. You can see I'm using the indent where the screws go to lift that out so as I don't cause any damage to the visible side of the bezel. Now note on the watch, the stem that is in the watch movement is at the 3 o'clock position, and we are going to lift up very gently at the 9 o'clock position to lift the movement out of the case. So you're going to do that very carefully, and while filming this, no watches were injured as this watch fell on a soft padded mat. So right now I'm just examining the movement, just making sure there's no debris on it. Put it aside here, and I'm going to pop out that battery. You're going to find that Ebel's use several different style batteries for the women's watches and several different for the men's watches, depending on what model you have. So I'm just going to gently pop out that battery, and we'll put the watch movement on our pad so it stays safe. You can see this is an Ebel branded watch. However, I do believe this is an ETA movement. It might be an ISA. I'm not positive. This is branded for Ebel. So now we've got the new battery. This happens to be a 362, but you want to double check and see what's in your watch. We're going to pop that new battery in, and you'll see the watch is running perfectly and back to normal. Now it's time to start the preparation for putting the watch movement back in its case. So you can see that little hole there is where the case tube is. That's where the stem protrudes into the watch. And what we're going to do is we're going to align the movement up with that so that the stem that protrudes from the watch movement is coming through the case tube when we place it back in the watch movement. You're going to very gently push it down. I always suggest using gloved hands because that way you won't get fingerprints or anything on the watch movement or the dial. Once the movement is placed back into the case, I'm just going to gently use a hand blower and just blow off any debris that might have gotten onto the watch while I was working on it and double check for cleanliness. I'll put that aside, and I'm going to grab the diamond bezel. This is a diamond bezel. This is a lady's sports watch. And I'm just going to check this for dust and debris. You can see the sides are a little bit dirty, so I'm going to go and clean that up right now. Once I get that cleaned up, we can go back to putting it onto the watch. So now that the bezel is cleaned, we can go ahead and align it up with the case. Now you'll notice that the 5 screws are they're not quite parallel around the watch bezel. They are keyed so that 2 screws on the stem side of the watch are a little bit farther apart than the rest of them. So just line those holes up with the bezel indents, and once you get that all lined up, we are ready to go to the next step, which is to start putting the screws back into the watch case. Again, these are gold screws on this particular watch. Sometimes they will be gold plated, sometimes stainless steel, so just keep that in mind. These are solid gold, so you're going to be very careful. We're going to place the first screw in there, and I'm going to turn this down a little bit more than halfway, maybe tighten it up about 2/3. I want to leave it a little bit loose because just in case the bezel is a little misaligned, when I tighten these screws up, it'll kind of align itself, and that's a good way to make sure that everything's in there very good. Again, we're going to speed this up because we don't need to watch me doing the 5 screws and tightening them all down. So now the 5 screws are set in place, and I'm just going to go ahead one by one and tighten them down all the way, and I'm using my precision torque screwdriver to do this. Laugh out loud. So you're going to do this, but you're not going to tighten them too tight because they don't need to be that tight. Again, you want to just seal the watch. You don't need to damage these gold screws. Again, they're very hard to get if you're not an Ebel dealer, and they are very expensive. So now that that's done, let's take a look at the alignment of the male end of the stem. The male end is the part that protrudes from the watch movement, and the female end is going to click into that. We're going to place our gasket back on here. I did order a new gasket. That should be here soon, and we'll pop that on before the customer gets the watch back. So I'm just showing you here. We're going to take a look at the female end of the stem, which is attached to the crown. You can see it has an alignment. Snaps in position one way, and you want to just double check that. It makes it a little bit easier with the male end that's inside the watch. Going to place that in there. You're going to gently push it down so that it goes back to the 0 position. If you have to turn it one way or the other, you're going to just push gently so that it lines itself, and it will eventually snap into place like it just did. Now that the crown's on the watch, we can go ahead and set the date and time. Pretty simple. There are 2 positions on this particular stem, one for the date, one for the time. So you have 0, which is all the way in. The first click would be the date setting, and the second click out would be the time adjustment. Well, that's pretty much it for the simple part of changing a battery on an Ebel watch. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing to my channel. You can see my feeds then when I post new videos on jewelry design, 3D printing jewelry, watch repair, and watch reviews. Thanks for watching, guys, and have a great day.